If you've watched videos telling you to choose yourself and felt inspired, but then nothing changed, that's because most content confuses emotional activation with actual developmental work. Here's what choosing yourself actually requires. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I keep seeing the same pattern. Someone in their 30s, 40s, or 50s watches one of those viral videos about Carl Jung and choosing yourself. The kind with dramatic music and quotes about living your truth and the universe conspiring in your favor. They feel something shift. There's a recognition point, a permission they've been waiting for. And then a week later, they're back in the same routines, same relationships, the same quiet sense that something fundamental needs to change, but they don't know how to actually do it. This isn't because they lack courage. It's because what they were given was inspiration without architecture. The viral content on individuation, Jung's term for becoming who you actually are, treats it like a motivational state you can talk yourself into. But Jung wasn't describing a feeling. He was describing a developmental process with specific stages, specific pitfalls, and specific requirements. And when you understand what he actually meant, you realize why choosing yourself hasn't worked yet. This matters right now because midlife creates the conditions for this work, whether you're ready or not. The outward focused tasks of the first half of life, building a career, establishing a family, securing your place in the world, start losing their organizing power. And something inside you begins asking a different question. Not what do I need to achieve, but who am I when I'm not performing? That question doesn't go away just because it's uncomfortable. So let me give you the clinical truth about what choosing yourself actually means in Jung's framework. It's not self-optimization. It's not permission to leave everything behind. It's not a one-time decision that changes your life overnight. Jung called it individuation, the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of your psyche into a more complete and authentic whole. So here's what that actually looks like. It means confronting your shadow, not the idea of your shadow, the actual parts of yourself you've spent decades avoiding. Your greed, your anger, your selfishness, yes, but also your creativity, your spontaneity, your authentic desires that didn't fit the life you built. It means withdrawing your projections, recognizing that the flaws you criticize so vehemently in others are often reflections of the parts of yourself you've disowned. This is not comfortable work. It's humbling work. It means negotiating your relationship with your persona, the social mask you wear, the professional identity, the role you play in your family. Jung said a functional persona is essential for social cohesion. The danger is over-identifying with it, believing you are the mask instead of someone wearing one. And here's the part the viral videos leave out. It means doing all of this without destroying your relationships, violating your values, or mistaking ego inflation for authentic growth. That's a very different task than the universe will conspire in your favor once you choose yourself. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, that sounds right, but I still don't know how to actually do it, I want to name something specific. One of the reasons choosing yourself feels impossible right now is because you're measuring yourself against the wrong developmental stage. Jung said the first half of life is about ego development, establishing yourself, building confidence, adapting to the external world. That work requires discipline, performance, and fitting in. The second half of life is about integration, bringing the neglected parts of yourself into consciousness, finding deeper meaning, and serving something larger than your own achievement. Those are fundamentally different tasks. They require different metrics. But if you're still judging yourself by the first half of life standards, productivity, optimization, constant growth, proving your worth, then any movement toward integration is going to feel like failure. You'll think you're actually falling behind when you're right on time. Let me give you a concrete example from my own life. In 2016, I had what looked like a textbook identity crisis. I'd built a successful therapy practice, a beautiful home, and a loving husband. I was doing everything right according to the metrics I'd chased my whole adult life. And at this point, I felt completely hollow. I was actually quite ill. I had a very bad MS relapse. But because my identity had shifted from individual to family role, and I hadn't updated my internal measuring system, I was still trying to prove my worth through achievement when what I actually needed was to grieve the parts of myself I'd set aside and integrate them in a new way. That's not a problem you solve with more discipline. That's a developmental transition you have to navigate. So when I say choosing yourself, I'm not talking about choosing your preferences or your comfort. I'm talking about choosing the harder work of actually becoming whole. All right, so what does that process actually look like? Based on Jung's work and the research on midlife development, there are three essential parts to this. Part one, shadow integration. This is where you identify the parts of yourself you've suppressed or projected onto others. Not theoretically, but practically. You start paying attention to your strong emotional reactions, both positive and negative, because they're clues. If someone's confidence irritates you, ask yourself where you've suppressed your own. If someone's softness attracts you, ask yourself where you've hardened. The goal isn't to act out those shadow parts. It's to acknowledge their existence, reclaim the psychic energy you've been using to repress them, and find constructive ways to express their life force. Part two, values archaeology. This is different than values clarification exercises you might have done before. Clarification assumes you know what your values are and just need to write them down. Archaeology assumes that your real values, the ones that actually guide your behavior, are buried under layers of conditioning, expectation, and adaptation. So you're not asking, what do I value? You're asking, what have I been living as if I value? And is that actually true? You're excavating. You're looking at the discrepancy between your stated values and your enacted behavior. That gap is where the integrity work lives. Part three, behavior alignment. Once you've identified the gap between who you've been and who you're becoming, you have to close it. Not all at once, not dramatically, but deliberately. This is where differentiation becomes essential. Murray Bowen's concept of maintaining a strong sense of self while staying emotionally connected to the people who matter. You learn to say, this doesn't work for me anymore, without needing to convince anyone or defend yourself. You learn to set boundaries not as walls that shut people out, but as definitions of where you end and someone else begins. You learn to hold steady when your changes create discomfort in your relationships, without abandoning either your path or your people. That's the architecture Jung was pointing to. Not choose yourself and watch everything align, but integrate yourself and learn to live from that center. Now, here's what I want you to know about what happens when you actually do this work. Some things change profoundly. Some things don't change at all. and knowing the difference matters. But before we go further, I want to say that it's very rare that you can do this without the support of a professional counselor, specifically a Jungian analyst. So if you're in this process right now, please be sure to find somebody that can help navigate you through this wonderful integration process. Here's what changes: your internal experience. The constant low-grade anxiety of living out of alignment starts to quiet. Not because your life is perfect, but because you're no longer divided against yourself. Your decision-making, choices that used to feel agonizing become clearer because you're working from a coherent set of values instead of competing obligations. Your relationships, not necessarily the people, but the quality of connection. You stop performing and start relating. Some people won't like that. The right people will. What doesn't change? The fundamental reality of your life circumstances. Individuation doesn't make your job less demanding or your family dynamics less complex. It changes how you navigate those realities. The need for ongoing work. This isn't a destination. It's a lifelong process of integration. Jung said you can only individuate with or against something or somebody. The self is always a link in the chain. What he meant is this: you don't become yourself in isolation. You become yourself in relationship. Sometimes that means aligning with people who support your growth. Sometimes it means defining yourself against expectations that no longer fit. But you're always in dialogue with something outside yourself. The myth of radical independence, that you can just cut everyone off and find yourself alone, isn't individuation. It's isolation. The viral videos promise transformation. The clinical truth offers integration. One definitely sounds more exciting. The other actually works. So how do you know if you're actually doing this work versus just consuming more content about it? Here are the recognition moments I've observed both in my own life and with clients. You notice yourself getting less defensive. When someone criticizes you or questions your choices, you can hear it without immediately needing to explain or justify. Not because you don't care, but because you're not depending on their approval to know who you are. You experience what Jung called synchronicity, those moments when your inner and outer worlds align in ways that feel meaningful, not magical, but meaningful. You make a decision from your actual values and the right opportunity appears. You set a boundary and the relationship deepens instead of ending. You start choosing presence over performance. In conversations, in your work, in how you move through your day, you're less concerned with how you appear and more interested in what's actually happening. These aren't dramatic breakthroughs. They're quiet confirmations that something fundamental has shifted. One last thing I want to address: timeline. The viral videos make it sound like you wake up one day, choose yourself, and everything changes. Jung said this work typically takes years. And in my personal experience, he's right. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because integration happens at the pace of lived experience. You have to encounter yourself in enough different contexts: relationships, work, solitude, conflict, to actually see the patterns you're working with. But here's the advantage of doing this in midlife. You have data now. You have decades of lived experience to draw from. You can see the arc of your own story in ways you couldn't see at 25 or 30. The younger version of yourself was building a life. This version gets to examine what you built and decide what stays. That's not a crisis. That's a privilege. So, if you're someone who's been watching those viral videos about choosing yourself and wondering why nothing's changing, I want to offer you this. You don't need more inspiration. You need a more accurate map. And that map has specific landmarks: shadow work, values archaeology, and behavior alignment. It has a compass, your internal sense of coherence when actions match values. It has a pace, integration, not inspiration. And it has fellow travelers, therapists, coaches, people further along the path who can show you what the terrain actually looks like. Individuation isn't a motivational state. It's a developmental process with specific requirements. It's shadow work, not shadow bypass. It's values archaeology, not values performance. It's behavior alignment, not life abandonment. And it happens at the pace of integration, not the pace of inspiration. The good news is, midlife creates the exact conditions for this work. The hard news is, no one can do it for you. But you're not alone in it. If this framework clarified something you've been sensing but couldn't name, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to go deeper into this work, the actual architecture of midlife integration, I have other videos that map the terrain. Subscribe so you don't miss them, because this is ongoing work, not a one-time fix. Jung said the first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego. The second half is going inward and letting go of it. That's not a crisis. That's a summons.